It's 12:30. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, welcome to our fifth webinar, uh, Association of Youth Offending Team Managers in partnership with Microlink Education. And today we are extremely fortunate to be joined by Sharon Gray. More about Sharon in a moment. Today we are going to have the luxury of an hour to, if you like, have a little bit of a visioning session, trying to look into the future. What is it that we can do to reduce the numbers of young people entering youth justice pathways? So we're looking at partnership practice. We're going to try and look at the elements of partnership practice that could be perhaps transformed in terms of systemic thinking, in terms of assistive technology, in terms of perhaps even a way of being that will have a profound impact on young people over the next 10 years. It's a luxury that we have, and we hope you share with us that journey. So we're going to be looking at a number of topics as were shared when we started advertising this topic. Some of them you might think, oh, that's a bit strange. Why are you doing that? But hopefully all will be revealed in the next 45 minutes or so. But I'd just like to first of all welcome Sharon. Sharon is a Youth Justice Board member, but much more than that. She's been a tireless advocate for understanding why young people are the way they are. Sharon runs a fantastic service. In fact, Sharon, I'm right in saying you were at Kirklees yesterday, correct?
I certainly was, with head teachers of primary, secondary and specialist settings, talking about a very similar approach, actually, child first in education.
Fantastic. And if there's one take home message today, it is about that. And that is, how do we make an entire system child first? So that's where we hope to be. It's going to be a bit of a conversation. So if you hear both of us talking at the same time, it's because we get excited. But again, if that excitement spreads to you guys, well, brilliant. How wonderful is that? So having Sharon here is a wonderful opportunity to really ask the question: where did this all come from? Why is it that it's become such a strategic imperative?
Mhm.
So, Sharon, please, and do say when you want me to move to the next slide. Yeah,
I certainly will, Marius, and thank you. Great to be here. So just a sort of a precursor, many of you listening will know a lot about the Youth Justice Board, established in 1998 under the Crime and Disorder Act. At the YJB, the statutory responsibility is to retain oversight to the whole system, from those first arrests to adulthood or discharge, identifying and sharing effective practice, publishing relevant information and offering that independent expert advice to ministers in the Ministry of Justice in the first instance and other policy and decision makers as well. Now, the board itself is made up of board experts in their fields, from education to youth work to academia to policing, which is supported by the executive, totaling approximately 100 staff. So latest statistics show that continued positive trend of fewer children entering our youth justice system and an all-time low in number of children in secure care or custody. Now, much of this very welcome reduction is due to the excellent work that you guys are doing across our 154 local authorities, youth justice teams, expert practitioners, tirelessly ensuring that childhood mistakes don't metastasize into entrenched full-blown offending. However, some of it is also due to delays in policing and courts, by which children who commit offences are adults by the time their cases are dealt with. And especially post-COVID, those children who remain in the system face more acute and multiple complex challenges and need more support to remove dissolve barriers and create opportunities for them in order to move forward with their lives. So the child first approach is very much based on a secure ground of evidence, consistently telling us that using this child first as a guiding principle is effective in addressing the offending behaviour of that small number of children within the youth justice system today, and in preventing offending by those children who are more likely to enter the system. So you can see the vision in the slide there. But child first is not simply a mantra or an ideology. It's an approach based on evidence of what works. Underpinning everything is the imperative to understand and treat children as children, prioritizing the best interests of individual children and recognizing their particular needs, capacities, rights, and potential. So a child first system, all work is child focused, developmentally informed, and acknowledges those structural barriers and meets responsibilities towards children. So it's vital to promote children's individual strengths, capacities, and build their pro-social identity for that sort of sustainable desistance, leading to the safer communities and fewer victims. That is absolute our vision. So in that child first system, all work is constructive, future focused, and built on those effective supportive relationships that enable and empower children to fulfill their potential and make that positive contribution to society. We know that our children respond well to collaboration, and that encourages that real active participation, the engagement, and of course the wider systemic social inclusion that Marius that we're talking about. So the child first system, it's all about all work being meaningful, collaboration with children and their carers. So really preventing stigma by diverting children wherever possible. And also we're acknowledging that the Youth Justice Board weren't the authors or the first adopters of this approach. We've learned and continue to learn from others, many of whom have been absolute trailblazers in this adoption. Here we can see on the slide the research that sits beyond the child first approach, and some great practice studies there that I would absolutely recommend if you get a chance to have a little look at that.
And I'll just add there, Sharon, when you get this slide deck, all of the hyperlinks you see will be active. So you won't have to go searching for the material, just click on the link and you'll go straight there. Thank you, Sharon. Yeah.
Thank you. And if you could move on the slides for me, please, Marius, that would be great. And if we could pop into what we're looking at are the 4 tenets of what child first, the child first approach is all about. And it is absolutely seeing children as children and understand developmentally appropriately how we can effectively step in to support, okay, prioritizing, as you can see, those best interests of children, identifying at the earliest stage possible their individual specific needs, capacities, rights, and potential as well, and being able to step in to support as soon as possible with children and the wider system around our children. Our second tenet, if you could move on, please, is about building that social identity, that sense of who I am and how I can go on to positively make a difference. And particularly if my window to the world hasn't enabled me that developing confidence and ability to see a successful future for whatever reason. So it's identifying those strengths, capacities, and promoting those to enable that we really focus on supporting that more pro-social identity.
And that word, pro-social, Sharon, everyone uses the word antisocial. If we use the word pro-social as much as we use the word antisocial, we might just affect change by one word.
Absolutely. And Marius, you're really referring to our strengths-based social model as we're moving away from the deficit. Actually, I've written recently, Marius, I don't know whether you heard, but Alex Chalk, Secretary of State for Justice, Lord Chancellor, in recent discussions, he noted there is treasure in the heart of every child. This is what it's about, isn't it? And as we see here, it's less about what I've done and more about what I can become. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
Yes.
so we move on into how and why and where. So
Yeah.
looking at collaborating with children, really listening and evidencing that we've heard the voice of our young people and we're drawing those lived experiences in to inform next steps. Yeah, and we have within the Youth Justice Board, our Youth Advisory Network organisation, and our youth ambassadors that work alongside, but finding creative ways of drawing in ways to collaborate across the justice system. So minimizing that criminogenic stigma from the contact within the system is absolute of paramount. And of course, diverting from that stigma, promoting a childhood removed from the justice system. So our passion, Marius, is absolutely about supporting our most vulnerable children when they've gotten into states of potential crisis as a result, potentially, of the barriers that society have put in place, but equally how we can work systemically to support children and adults alike in terms of those preemptive, preventative approaches to being alongside. So here, what we stand for is really understanding that the criminogenic effects on children are damaging. So we need to look systemically, system-wide, and really use the evidence that we have, the neuroscience of learning, the biology of stress, to really underpin that child first approach in
But
all that we do.
also, but as this slide does show, though, it is also about risk, a risk to the individual, risk to society, and it's one of the central tenets of how youth offending teams operate, isn't it?
Of course,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. In that aim to create those safer communities. And so in our next slide, just briefly looking at the guiding principles for any of the policy or practice decisions that are being made and the questions that we're continually asking ourselves and asking all of our stakeholders. That candid, critical challenge of self when we're working with and alongside our children. Is it the best interests? Recognizing those structural barriers, adult responsibilities, unconscious bias, conscious bias, all of those things, promoting children to feel engaged and diverting ultimately from the system, not drawing them in. So in summary, we have that child first approach, Marius. And if we go to our next slide, we can see them sort of it's almost summarized there. A, B, C, D. We are treating children as children, building that pro-social identity, collaborating with children, and really diverting from stigma.
I love that slide. Yeah, the simple. It is simple, actually, isn't it? A, B, C, D. Simple as the alphabet.
Absolutely.
No, beautiful, beautiful. Um, so that's the drive coming for youth justice services. But of course, youth justice services actually live within an ecology, a local ecology of children's services. And it's fair to say, isn't it, maybe 10, 15 years ago, within local authority areas, maybe children entering youth justice pathways was seen as an embarrassment, perhaps something that local authorities didn't want to know about, maybe not even care about. It would be someone else's problem the moment a young child enters a youth justice pathway. Thank God things have changed. And we are now looking at how can the whole of a local ecology work around the needs of what are very vulnerable young people, Sharon. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Absolutely, Maris.
Yeah.
So looking at those, as you say, building that trauma-informed system, supporting our adults and equipping them with that knowledge from a real heartfelt, emotive state of understanding how, as you mentioned again, we need to be when we're alongside our
Mm,
children and each other.
yeah. So let's examine what trauma informed actually means, because I do believe in the last 10 years that has been one of the most fundamental changes in everyone's attitude and maybe values and maybe beliefs around the young people that we're talking about. As last year, a colleague of mine, Dr. Alec Chard, working across the West Midlands, has produced, I think, an absolutely groundbreaking report. And yeah, uh, the young people who he studied, the violence, the poverty, and the abuse that they've suffered on the way up has been huge. And there's an acknowledgement. Well, there is never an excuse for committing crime. What this individual report sets out is some of the terrible experiences the young people have faced growing up. This is some of the highlights from his report. Out of 80 children, and you can see this doesn't add up, does it? Many of these young people have the multiple indicators, but out of the 80, 9 in 10 known or suspected to have been abused. 8 out of 10 health issues, 8 out of 10 school exclusion, 7 out of 10 domestic violence, 7 out of 10 suspected victims of violence, 7 out of 10 living in poverty. Only one child out of that 80 had no recorded abuse or childhood adversity. Over to you, Sharon. ACEs. Tell us
And,
about
and
the
if we
ACEs.
look at the impact of these statistics, which are wholly shocking, no matter how much we know, when we actually see them, it's absolutely shocking. We can't but sort of go back to the study, which I know that everybody is very likely to be aware of, over 20 odd years ago, looking at the impact of adverse childhood experiences. Now, if you haven't come across the detail of this, I absolutely
Mm.
recommend you watch the Dean Burke Harris's YouTube clip of about 12 minutes, where we're looking at the largest group of people in such a study as this, and identifying those children who had experienced adversity before the age of 18 without protective factors. And one of those predominant protective factors can be those relationships, enabling relationships, being in school. But they've experienced adversity, and they did almost an ACEs score, which has been criticised because we weren't looking at that stage at the impact of protective factors. So as you can see, those areas that we looked at, if we move on from that, Maris, please, to the next slide, it comes as
Sorry, I
no,
went far. Sorry, my mistake. There we go. Yeah.
oh, but yeah, if it comes as no surprise, the greater the adversity with less protective factors, the increase in emotional issues, health issues, social problems, and so on, including poor life
Oh,
expectancy. So if we on to
unbelievable. I'll
absolutely.
just sort of hijack that at the moment. A study was done across Wales, and they looked at these risk factors and compared to people with no adverse childhood experience, those young people with more than four aces in the hand. I just can't believe these statistics. This really motivated me. From 4 times more likely to be a high risk drinker to 14 times more likely to be the victim of violence to 20 times more likely to be incarcerated in any point in their life.
And Maris, interestingly, when I'm looking at this, what really moved me was that 4 ACEs potentially reduce the lifespan by 10 years, 6 by 20 years. So not only have our children experienced devastatingly potential adversity, they've got a shorter life. And initially, I used to think perhaps this is because of poor behavior. But what we realize that as our children and adults go into that fight flight response as a result of a hypervigilant stress regulation system, the cortisol and the adrenaline and the noradrenaline that surges through our body enabling us to survive that situation continues to surge in our body and becomes almost like a corrosive, erosive acid on our major body organs. And so now we're unpicking why the potential for a very much reduced lifespan, and unpicking things like cancer,
Mm,
strokes,
mm,
stress impacts on not just emotional health and well-being, but our
mm.
physical
Oh,
health and
totally,
well-being too.
totally, totally. So that's why, as you've written there so clearly, Sharon, we have to consider ACEs. It's crucial. crucial to improving the lives of children and young people. Um, I love your wording there, through authentic inclusion, resilience, and equity.
And
Absolutely
I think
amazing.
also, it's understanding that over the last 10 years, we have so much more information about how our bodies are and brains are developing. So if you just click the next piece of this slide for us, please, Marius, we can really see, and these are the Romanian orphanages. The study is continuing some 40, 50 years on to look at how these children who are in these orphanages are doing in life in general. And what this really shows is our brains are wired as a result of our relationships and experiences. Our brains are neuroplastic, which is where the hope and optimism is. So we used to say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. It's a little bit harder, as we can probably profess now, Marius, but you can do it. But with our children, when their brains are going through significant change, we absolutely can be alongside to be the neurosculptures of our children's brains.
Oh,
Because
totally,
when
totally.
children, when they don't have those experiences, those relationships, we can see that. And I know you're going to go into to look at the brains of some of our children and the impact that adversity has had. So I
Totally. Yeah, this is stuff from the wonderful Anna Freud Institute and Eamon McCrory. He was looking at something about latent vulnerability, which is really how mental health is impacted on because of childhood adversity. You talked about hypervigilance, didn't you, Sharon? Just look at that slide. I mean, the same areas of a child's brain who's been abused are active when compared to soldiers coming back from the war zone. In other words, these young people are unconsciously devoting so much more time to threat processing. They're becoming hypervigilant as a form of protection, which explains why some kids just hyperreact, even to a look from a teacher or a comment by a peer. And in the community, if they happen to be carrying a knife for self protection, we can only just assume what will happen. You know,
And I think, as you're saying, the hyper vigilant amygdala, it absolutely, it's almost like if I say, don't think of purple spotted oranges, Marius, don't think, you automatically go to think about that. So, where children have experienced those potential threatening environments, they're constantly, subconsciously, unconsciously looking out for that potential threat that we might not perceive
no,
through our neuroception that it is a sense of threat, but those
yeah,
hypervigilance will absolutely.
thank you. So, okay, let's carry on with our reflection on partnership working. So, I hope I'm not contentious when I say beyond disproportionality. I am glad that there is a focus on disproportionality at the moment. It is well needed, without a doubt. But there is, I believe, more to it. Now, when we started this work with AYM, Association of Youth Offending Team Managers, back in 2016, one of the parallel things we asked for and got was a comparison where the Ministry of Justice put its database of young offenders together with the Department for Education, which put its education database together. For the first time, we looked a bit more into the history of young people entering youth justice pathways. And what we found from the data, which was really interesting, for the first time, we looked at young people who'd been identified as on SEN support, as well as young people who'd been on statements. When you put the figures together, already that takes us to over 70%. But then youth justice professionals were telling us, hey, that's not the whole story. So many young people entering a youth justice pathway at 15 or 16 or 17 had undiagnosed and unidentified needs. Des Minute and his Milton Keynes team, when they looked at 31 young people who were at risk of exclusion from school or moving to an alternative provision, they found that out of those 31 kids, 96% had identified speech, language, and communication needs. When we were doing the project last year, we came up with this model because we thought actually, hang on, it's not just about special educational needs. And yes, disproportionality is down there in the bottom right. But as you can see, ACEs, or if you like, the debilitating impact of various conditions, really do impact on young people. And some young people get trapped in those limans, those crossover areas. What happens if a young person's just sub-threshold for social care? What happens if a young person is just sub-threshold for CAMS intervention? What happens if that young person has an unidentified dyslexia? What happens if they're subject to trauma and neglect and perhaps family dysfunction and disproportionality? We mustn't be afraid anymore of suggesting that we label children, because each one of these is a flag of desperation waving in the wind, isn't it, Sharon?
It is, and equally, those labels, whilst can be really helpful, if, for example, we needed 7 ticks in a box to be autistic, but we've only got 6, but equally, we've got 6 ticks in a box for dyslexia, 6 ticks for dyscalculia. The complexity of need is very much there, but we haven't perhaps managed to get that label. So absolutely, labels are key to support, but equally, really looking in at the individual children and what they need as well.
Totally. And just a little bit of trying to move the agenda on. About 8 months ago, I published a paper called Widening Our Understanding and Application of the Social Model of Disability. As the social model of disability says, the world has to be enabled to enable someone with a disability to function in it. So it's not about saying that person can't go up the stairs. Society has to say those stairs shouldn't be there in the first place. Now, my proposal was, let's widen the social model of disability to include young people disabled by circumstance, because then we have one model that works for everyone. So do have a look if you get a chance. Furthering our understanding of partnership working is so important, and the work we've done across the system in the last 8 to 9 years has thrown up fantastic examples of where youth offending services are working what I call upstream. They're not waiting for a young person to enter a youth justice pathway, and sometimes not even at risk of entering a youth justice pathway. They are working with colleagues at the earliest possible level. Early identification, early help. Dare I say, I call it pre-diversion diversion, because in some ways, diversion is great, but maybe it's too late. It's working down the pathways. Data sharing, for example. When we first started this project, we found that critical data about young people wasn't being combined in local authorities, it was being refracted. It was held in, social services database or education database or youth justice database. And they didn't talk to each other because of data protection laws. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now people are beginning to appreciate that a holistic picture of a young person's needs is utterly vital. I've got a link here to a seminar we ran for CACI, who do the Child View Youth Justice database. And that was done about 4 or 5 years ago. And again, we were saying how identifying, assessing, mitigating the impact of childhood trauma is so important in this. And as my colleague Alex Chard, who wrote Punishing Abuse, said, it's important not just to do a screen of that young person. Don't do a snapshot. Run a video of that child's life. And I think everything you've said, Sharon, and you're nodding there, is central to it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That critical nature of running that video. What we're also seeing around the country is amazing, effective multi-agency panels and meetings, where some are using it through contextual safeguarding. Some are looking at local vulnerabilities, and they're pulling away all the barriers. They are putting together effective stories around children. So they're They've got people in the room who represent children looked after. They are looked. They've got people there from social care. They've got people there from schools. They've got people there from the gang and drug awareness units, as well as the youth offending services, and they are talking about the same children and growing a holistic view. And like you just did yesterday, Sharon, working effectively with schools. Um, I'm going to be contentious here because we mentioned this right at the start, didn't we? We said, you know, if ever there should be a child first service, it should be a school, correct?
Yes, spot on.
And I can say this as an ex-ed teacher, maybe that's where sometimes we have lost our way.
And I can agree with you as an ex head teacher, but I also have got to sort of put in there that there are some fabulous child first, sort of systemically supportive mainstream secondary schools, special schools, primary schools out there. And how unusual outcomes, attendance seem to be improving as a result of that.
Abs- isn't that food for thought? If you put people before performance, performance will go up.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's enough about schools. I was delighted that the framework that we devised with the Association of Youth Offending Team Managers, with the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, with experts in SEND, we all worked together and we came up with this framework. And as you can see, there were sections in it which are pure child first, and that was written 8 years ago. We still have currency, and we've still got over 60 youth offending teams across the country engaged in our processes. Delighted for it. Now, let's move on. What do we mean by moving from trauma informed to trauma transformed? Moving away from doing to a way of being. This has been very much, if you like, triggered by my work with schools around bringing coaching and a coaching methodology into the heartbeat of school improvement. Now, one of the most influential people on my development was a guy called John Westburnham, a brilliant school improvement person behind London Challenge and other things. And he came up with this lovely model about a movement through coaching and through professional development, from what he called shallow learning through to deep learning to profound learning. So, what did he mean by that? And how does it relate into what we've been talking about? Well, shallow learning could be, yeah, just knowing about childhood trauma, some of the stuff that you have shared with us today. Deep learning could be, if you like, trauma informed practice. In other words, you take your knowledge and you start to apply it in a systematic way. But profound learning is when it becomes part of your being. It's intuitive, it's got authentic meaning. You are independent of people telling you how to do things. Um, so here's some. Do have a look at these slides. I'm not going to spend time going over them, but shallow learning is about memorization, uncritical facts, rote learning, learning very much controlled by a teacher, coaches. We move to deep learning, a way of doing. Oh, you're beginning to put the model together for yourself. You're integrated prior learning, and you're making some really good choices about how you work. But profound learning is where knowledge becomes wisdom. It's intuitive. The example I can give, when I first became a head teacher, it sometimes took me 2 or 3 days to make a difficult decision. After 10 years being a head, it took me 10 seconds. And I knew it would be right. And yes, that is what it means. I'm going to give you a little bit of a social experiment now, guys. So everyone out there, fingers on the buttons to leave a comment. Yeah, leave a comment in the question zone. I am going to show you now 3 sets of eyes. I am just going to show you them for 2 seconds on the screen. I want you to look at those eyes just for 2 seconds and tell me, who would you most like to be interviewed by for a job, right? A, B, or C? I'm going to try and move myself out of the way here. So here it goes. So the moment you see it, it's just going to be for 2 seconds. I want you to just type A, B, or C into the question pane and then pump your answer out to me. Here we go. Countdown. 3, 2, 1. Go. 1, 2, off. Okay. So type A, B, or C in. And I'm just going to go to the chat function now. I can see it. And oh, C, 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 C. We have had already 23 responses that have said C.
Yeah, I would say
Okay.
so too, Marius.
Okay. A is angry eyes, B is neutral eyes, and C is smiling eyes. You have picked up in 2 seconds a two-dimensional picture of just someone's eyes, and you have connected with them. If you are a child hypervigilant to threat, what are you going to pick up from the room around you? And this is what I mean about a sense of being. If you really have been transformed by trauma-informed practice, you will have those smiling eyes. Neuroception is it's gone beyond body language from the 70s and 80s. It is now a science. And you've done some great work in this area, Sharon. Please take over.
Thank you, Marius. It's so, I find it so interesting. It's all about that polyvagal theory, the work of Stephen Porges that really underpins again with the evidence base, scientific evidence base, that we are born into human interaction. It's an absolute desperate. It's a need. Without it, we will potentially die. And what happens within that potential human interaction that's positive, um, creating those sort of opportunities to be alongside. And we look at Bruce Perry's work here. There is no more effective neurobiological intervention than a safe relationship. The relationship works to bring a brain that has been triggered and goes offline back into regulation. And I know when my brain is triggered and offline, even as an adult, I will not be making problem solving and effective choices. And quite often I'll need someone alongside, even now, to physiologically be there, to calm, relationally regulate before I can go into cognitive regulation and take a more informed approach to how I might respond in the moment. So if we
Oh,
go to the
totally.
next slide, sorry, Marius.
Yes, totally agree. Totally 100% agree.
Yeah, so how we enable all of the adults across our systems to understand this. And again, we look at the polyvagal theory, we look at why it is that we had that profound response to those smiley eyes. And there is science behind that, understanding so that we as the adults can develop a greater self-awareness so we can be emotionally present and be alongside children and not coming from that sort of potential unconscious self-defensive mechanism in a potentially stressful situation. So
Oh,
this is
yes.
absolutely imperative that we have this real understanding. And the way that I've taken this is Dan Hughes. If you've not heard of Dan Hughes, I could just bite a bit of him because it's just superb, the work that he does in terms of psychotherapy with children who are looked after and really supporting adults to take this stance of pace, which it sort of interweaves throughout our secure stairs training. So it's not what we do, although that's very important too, it's the way that we do it, the how we are being in terms of that playful, flexible approach, accepting that some of these big feelings are being felt in that moment, being curious instead of furious in terms of why a child might respond in that way in that moment. And then absolute authority, but authority with empathy, authority with compassion, the balance of nurture and structure. And of course, coming from that space that I mentioned, that
Totally.
self-awareness, so that we can be aware of what we're communicating without words. Everything
Totally.
we don't say, we don't do, all of those types of things will have that impact on the neuroception.
Absolutely. And I think one of the central tenets of all of this is the fact that this is not being soft on children. If anything, it is combining, if you like, boundaries and reminding kids all the time of what they can do, what they cannot do,
Let's
but
be
also
kind on the
doing it.
child and tough on the behaviour.
Yes,
Kind on the child,
absolutely.
tough on the behaviour. Absolutely.
No, as I say to head teachers who are wedded to zero tolerance, and that produces the exclusions, I say to them, look, it's okay to be zero tolerance, yeah, but if you match it with 100% compassion, then you are doing your job. Eyes, prosody, pitch, tone of voice, body language. Yes, a child might screw up, but yes, you welcome them in. And maybe I did break accepted convention sometimes, but at the end of a high level exclusion meeting with governors with a difficult child who, after 2 hours, has declared they want to come back to the school, I might give them a hug at the end of the meeting because that's what I wanted to do.
And we know that some of our children that need the most love will ask for it in the most unlovable of ways sometimes.
Absolutely, and building on everything that you've said about emotional regulation, Microlink are now carrying on the torch from the Emotion Coaching UK and a project we did when I was working for Achievement for All. We now have an emotion coaching, which is basically a way of being around self-regulation. We worked with Knowsley, we worked with St Helens, we've done 7 local authority areas in London, and we can continue the work, as you do, Sharon, to make that world a different place. Coming near the end of it now, because what we've got to do now is look at maybe we talked about shared vision, shared values, and sometimes what we don't do locally is work with our partners to develop a shared vision, a shared set of values, and shared targets. And one of the things I want us to do is trying to move the agenda forward from equality to equity to removing barriers. Now, many of you will be familiar with the work that we're doing with youth offending services. We have now worked with 60, and so many of them, as you can see around here, from Staffordshire, Torbay, Cheshire East, St Helens, East Sussex, Stockton-on-Tees. Oh, the list goes on. There are elements of child first practice going on already. So after today, because you were all part of this network, I'll be sending you a list to citations which show what people do, and that's the stuff of these workshops. In a month's time, we're going to hear about Swindon, how the youth offending service there is doing their best to shape the local dialogue. And we're also going to hearing about from East Sussex about what they call their ERM meetings. More about that later. So moving the agenda onwards, we are familiar with the term equality, aren't we? And that diagram, I think that cartoon says it all. You give everyone the same amount of support. We treat them equally. How good is equality? Well, actually, let's think about another step in the direction. In order to see over that fence, we have to perhaps give differential support, maybe, and it's evidence based to individual young people, and we call that equity. Yeah, but I would like us now all to examine a third way. Let's get rid of the damn wall. Let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of some of those systemic barriers that exist that prevent young people from accessing a world. And the one I'd like to leave you all with is one about what being literate means. Now, Sharon, I don't know if your experience of it means, but uh, who holds the rights to what being literate actually means? I really worry about that because it does seem to be all about whether you can pass an exam or reach a certain functional level. And so, what do we do with prisoners with low literacy? We give them more literacy. What about young people who can't make a GCSE grade? We give them more GCSE English. How about using the social model of disability to enable the world in such a way that every person can communicate in that world? What do you think to that, Sharon?
Well, absolutely. And we've heard from some, I don't know, there was a fabulous program about autism recently where a child had been stated that he wasn't literate, but actually given those sort of accessibility tools was able to go on to really communicate his entire world in the most moving of ways. So absolutely dissolving those barriers, finding creative ways to enable, I think is absolutely what this is all about.
Yeah. And final slide for today, really, before we answer some of the questions and queries that are coming up, um, is this. This was an amazing young lady with complex needs as part of an assistive technologies project we've done now with over 400 schools. This is a young year 9 student using a wonderful bit of free software, free, totally free, called Immersive Reader, which enables you to take control of the size of the text, the number of lines you can see, the color of the background. It will read things out to you, totally free. And this is her using it for the first time. I hope you can see a smile behind the mask. There is now technology that is available that will enable communication in different ways so that the environment, the culture, and the practice in schools, prisons, society, everywhere will enable every person disabled by circumstance to have fair access to the world around them. Guys, that has got to somehow be our focal point, I think, as we kind of move forward. Yes, there is fantastic work going on everywhere. People are all looking at ways of improving the system, but I believe the best way of improving the system is actually having some smiling eyes everywhere when things are bad. Look, we've talked for exactly 46 minutes and we've been talking non-stop. So let me first of all try and look at some of the points that have been made. Um, Sharon, thank you for sharing your thoughts on the polyvagal theory. I'm now going to go to the question area and see if anything else has come in. Um, I'm going to whiz through them and see what's open under the questions. Um, it's a little bit awkward because Azeda, what's happened is that all I can see under open questions is microlink PC like this question to be answered. So I'm just going to see if I can.
In the Q&A, Marius, there was no question. People were answering to A, B, and C.
Oh, I see.
Yes,
I see. I see.
that's that. But we have Mark Radley raising hands. Do you want me to let him?
Oh yes, please. If Mark Radley's there, Mark, I would love you to correlate. Mark is someone I've worked with at Kaki. Mark, I have to say, was one of the inventors of ChildView. Mark, welcome.
Hi.
Great, I can hear you. Perfect.
Okay. Fabulous presentation, both of you. I think there's a lot of material which I hope is not very new to people. I think I've only just come across polyvagal theory myself, and it's very interesting as a information system designer to think about how to make it easy for practitioners to be accountable for their work, but also actually do the work, which is very different from the stress of recording. So I do hope we can improve upon that. Loved your stuff about removing barriers, Marius. But I haven't really got a question. I just think thank you very much. That was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you, Mark, and thank you for the meeting we had many years ago, which was actually around the genesis of the Youth Justice Awards. It's absolutely critical that people realise there's always a different way of improving, and one of the strengths of the work we do in partnership with local authority areas is we can share best practice. We can share best practice almost instantly. So if someone says, "Oh, we haven't got a protocol to get the SEND team working effectively with the Youth Justice Service," I can say, "Well, just have a look at what Staffordshire are doing. Have a look at what other parts of the country are doing," and this rapid sharing, as the Youth Justice Hub does as well. There's lots of ways of doing it, and the workshops we're running now monthly are just fantastic. It's by
Well, maybe I've got
professionals
a question.
for professionals. Go on then, Mark. Yep, Mark.
Maybe I've got a question for you,
Go on then.
Sharon. Actually, that as a supplier, even though I'm an ex-practitioner, I don't have access to the YJB's best practice sharing forum, and I think it'd be very helpful that to actually understand where the practice is going. And although I do that anyway personally, I think it'd be very helpful to have that opened up.
So that's the Youth
Because we're
Justice Hub.
designing against practice, not designing against the process. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's
yeah. I
interesting.
want to design against the practice, not design against the process.
Yeah, and Mark, certainly over the last year, the Youth Advisory Network organisations have done some system mapping there, and it is available. And what I'm thinking and really hearing your point, so thank you, is how we really publicise how that is available and how our colleagues can get in and involved in that, so we can include as much as possible in terms of that system mapping. So absolutely, Mark, we can go in and work alongside and support and strengthen across the piece, as it were. So my takeaway from this is absolutely to get back in with colleagues to have a discussion about how we are really making this accessible for all and equally, so that it's sort of bilateral facing, that we are updating all of the time as well. So brilliant point. I'm going to take it on board, Mark, and certainly we'll get back to colleagues by the end of today and see what's going on there. And certainly I'll contact through Marius the response, but thank you for asking that. Brilliant.
Nice one.
Very well
Nice
made.
one. Superb, superb. Guys, we're coming near the end of our webinar. If you have any thoughts you would like to share, please leave them. It doesn't have to be a question, but if you just leave, if you like, your comment and your thoughts in the Q&A box, we will do our best to answer it as best we can. What I'd like to just leave you with is what's to come. Just whip through the slideshow to the very last slide. First of all, I'd just like to share a few things as to what Microlink continue to do. We of course will continue with the Association of Youth Offending Team Managers to run these workshops, the Child First Effective Partnership Practice Workshops. We'll resume again in the autumn. We do have something coming up in July. I'll tell you about that in a moment. We will continue with AYM to support the quality mark for SEND awards. We're going to continue to use the SEND award framework, SEND for special educational needs and disabilities, but actually we're talking about complex needs now, aren't we? For the last year, Microlink, in partnership with an organisation called Teaching Times, have developed a programme for schools called Raising Attainment with Well-being. You know, when we call well-being creating a climate and culture that enables every member of staff and every child to thrive. We thought it would be a slow launch of about 50 to 60 schools. We have got 400 schools involved already, and it's a growing motion. If you have any influence over your local authority areas or your schools, just point them in my direction and I'll share the link to Raising Attainment with Wellbeing. We are devising now and rolling out a program called Be That Teacher. Notice the AT in it. Assistive Technologies. After 2 years of government funding, we are now attracting corporate sponsorship to try and train a further 1,000 schools to put assistive technologies in there to remove that barrier to learning around communication. We're also running emotion coaching for schools as well. So do get in touch with us if you need to. Now, some of you may want to carry on this debate. After today, I'll be sending you an email. And if you wish to have a further conversation, next Wednesday, 5th of July, 12:30 to 13:30, I'll be hosting an open forum where where the chat function will not be disabled, where you'll be able to have your say. If you're interested in making the debate go on, please respond to my email, and I'll open up the pathway to you. And our final webinar in this series next month on the 19th of July, we'll be looking at how two local authority areas, that's Swindon and East Sussex, are continuing to build effective child first partnerships. So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for contributing, and I know some of you will. And most importantly, Sharon, thank you incredibly for your insights, your foresight, and taking, I hope, some of the messages that have come together up to the YJB. Oh, you've frozen, Sharon. That's a shame. Oh no, you've come alive
Absolutely,
again.
Marius. And just thank you to you and all of our colleagues for the tireless and inspirational work that you do, continuing to make a difference in the lives of children and adults alike. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, a recording of this will be sent to you to peruse at your leisure or share with colleagues within a few days. Thank you to Azeda in the background for maintaining such a wonderful webinar for us. And the conversation will continue. Thank you, everybody. We'll be stopping the webinar in a few seconds. Thank you, Azeda. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you all. Go well.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Super. Sharon, that was superb. Thank you so much. It's been one of those wonderful moments just to share with you.
Yep.
It's great.
Likewise too. And as I said previously, Marius, you are an absolute inspiration. So thank you for all that you always here. If I can,
bless you.
or in any way, shape or form, the incredible stuff that you do.
No, it's going well. And so, yeah, no, we'll, as I say, this is the start, if you like, of to continuing this conversation. Because, yeah, if we can start having that same impact on schools now, that's my next target. And, yeah, as I say, raising attainment with well-being is going brilliantly, you know. And I think what I'll do is I'm going to put a recording of this webinar in there as well so people can see it.
Yeah, please do. And I would love to very much have a little look more about that myself. I'm
Super.
very
Nice one.
So.
Take care. Thank you so much. And Azeda, yes, please, if you stop recording now and stop the webinar, that'd be brilliant. Thank you, Azeda.
Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye bye. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.